All right, what's up? This is Cam from the Independent Musician Podcast, where we talk about philosophy and all that nerdy stuff to make your other musician friends sound dumber than you. All right, today we're going to be talking about how to enjoy music after becoming a musician and how to not be pretentious. All right, let's do this. With me, I have again Disqo, Volante.
What's up,
Hello.
man?
I don't know why Cam's chosen me for this podcast. I'm not entirely sure I'm qualified to make this assessment, but we'll try our best.
Than I am. Disqo is a musician, electronic musician out of Washington, D.C. currently. He does DJ and a lot of stuff in the electronic world.
Pleasure to be here as always.
Right on. So, I guess when we came into this topic together, like pretentiousness mixed with like how to enjoy music. Like I assume there's been a period where like you started not being able to hear music for what it was. You didn't say, it's not just, oh, I like this, oh, or this tastes good, or this sounds good to my ears. It's like, oh, that guy didn't compress the snare correctly, or wow, that one note on there.
You're going from 0 to 100 really quickly there. So yeah, I think that kind of happens anytime you start to develop a sophisticated palate for anything. You know, food is the same way. I'm sure people who enjoy fine wines are the same way. And, you know, I'll be, oh, it tastes like fruit. Oh, I like this. And they'll be like, yes, you can detect very subtle hints of, the oak that it was. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it's nice.
It's like alcohol to me. But
And you know, I think that's a pretty common phenomenon when you kind of start to develop a sophisticated taste for anything. I'm not quite sure I went from saying, I like this, I don't like this, to oh, they didn't compress their snare correctly. But I'll tell you actually where it started for me. There was a period when I was much younger where I basically in fact, I still have this. I'll see if I can, at some point we can pause the video and I'll go and get it just so I can show you. I've got a Sony Walkman CD player. And for a period of like 3 years, I had 3 CDs. It was the London Philharmonic, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It was Kraftwerk Computer World. And it was the Beatles One, which is something of an anthology disc. It kind of has some stuff from the really early days.
That's like a musical prescription. Like that's like a music snob is like, this is what you need to listen to. So this is real music. This give you a Rush CD and you're good.
Oh God, yeah, exactly. And I could those are the 3 CDs that I listened to basically non-stop for at least a full year. And the one thing that I really started listening to kind of experimentally, if you will, was the Beatles One. Because I noticed, I think it was one time I was like, I was asleep in the car or something, and like I had the Walkman on, and the headphones slipped off one side of my head, and I was like, wow, I hear different instruments if I put one side on versus whether I hear the other side. And I guess that was really my first experience of hearing panned instruments. And in fact, that was one of the earliest examples of using panned instruments on commercial recordings. So that's kind of where like this closer listening started for me, at least from the technical side of things. But that was before I really had too much formal like music education under my belt. So I wasn't really listening for the content of it. I was enjoying it. But that's kind of where I started to think I was listening beyond just like do I like this? Do I not like does it please me?
Yeah. So like, I mean, you've dealt with pretentious. We've had conversations about that like elitism of sorts. Like,
God,
we kind of both met each other.
Break.
Well, I mean, we've kind of met each other. Like, I'd like to think a little post-elitism. Like, describe what led to like that feeling of like this music's not. I'm better than this. I'm inferior. Oh, you listen to blah blah blah. Like, explain how that like evolved and most importantly, how you got out of that.
Oh, sure.
Or getting out of it. I'm not sure if you're fully out, but if you can.
I don't think you ever fully get out. But that's part of having developed taste and kind of having an awareness that there are things that you can objectively say are skillful or not skillful, and then there are things you can say despite that. I enjoy it or I don't enjoy it. I'm actually kind of interested to hear. I went first last time, so I'm kind of interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah. So let's see. I grew up in like some Christian music, which is it's pretty pretentious free because it wasn't cool and it never will be cool, and that's the whole goal to not be. And like my parents listened to a lot of beach music, and I was like, was like, this is not my thing. It's cool.
Like
I
Jack
guess.
Johnson or like?
Oh no, like Shag kind of music.
Oh,
like
okay,
70s,
okay, yeah,
like
yeah.
beach music.
Hmm.
And I was like, this is not my thing. And I slowly got into like more like rock genres. Like, okay, I like this because it sounds cool. It makes me feel powerful.
Who's your first rock band?
It was a Christian band called Audio Adrenaline. First of all,
Okay.
that's a cool name.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like listening back, I was like, oh, I see why I liked this. Like, I
It
listened
kind
to
of reminds me. The name just reminds me of Midi Matilda. Audio
Yeah.
Adrenaline, Midi Matilda. You know.
Yeah. And so like that was my first CD. I remember vividly like buying that and listening to it like hundreds and hundreds of times because that's all you had.
Yeah, yeah,
So
of
you
course.
just leave it on and you go play Legos or whatever.
It
And
was the same thing for me. Yeah.
and like gradually I started getting into like music became an escape for me. Like a lot of bands like kind of created this like environment where it wasn't even like I was in control or anything. It was just I could turn off the world for a bit. Like Tool was this for me. Like I listened to it, I'm like,
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
feel
sure.
like on this. It's like I'm in a dream and the rules are different, and I don't even know I'm in a dream because that's what a good dream is, you know.
Sure.
And-
Yeah, I think Tool kind of serves that purpose for a lot of people.
Sure.
Which they're awesome for that, for sure.
And like gradually, I became like trying to find bands that like let me escape from the world.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
and not so much in like a hedonistic, maybe it was a hedonistic way, but like just like a private way, because that's what I really what I wanted, a place where like, I guess I could be understood. But like even that already sounds like, yes, I want this private music that allows me to escape and transcend reality. I'm like, it's already like at the roots of like like pretentiousness. And you're like, oh, you listen to that music that's for partying, and I basically only listen to music by myself. Like,
while you were having premarital sex and engaging in hedonism, I studied the blade.
Yeah, exactly. But it was like music was a private activity to me. And music, there's a lot of music that's really good private music that is horrible, like group music. There's a lot of great group like dance music. A lot of it, like by yourself, is not until you like get it, you know?
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah. And, I know you and I have both probably had that experience of like this track that we love dearly. And you show it to all your friends, like a group of 3 or 4 people, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay. And like, they're just like, no, wait, no, you got to listen to it. Yeah.
But it's like there was that disconnect that only made me fall deeper into that escapist.
Oh, yeah.
Music.
I
Was that
feel
like, oh, well, I feel sad that I can't share this thing with you. I guess I'll go retreat into this some more, you know? And I never developed like these 2-player co-op like music genres because I didn't have anybody to share anything with. And that just kept going and going and going.
Interesting way to put it. Co-op musical genres. I'm going to remember that one.
And then I started writing my own stuff. I was like, I mostly wrote private music because that's what I liked. That's all I knew. I didn't even know how to like work with a crowd or work with other people and see a response. And I was like, and so at the time,
Hey, glad I'm not the only one.
not a lot's changed. I'm trying, but like at the time, like post-hardcore, like breakdowns and all that. That's because it wasn't even post. It was just hardcore. Like at the time was really popular. Everybody was like China, just like which like Warped Tour era kind of stuff was when I started playing
back
a lot.
when the everybody that I knew who was playing with aspired to have like that Randall Warhead and like the all that. It was great stuff too.
I mean, it's like in hindsight, it was cool, but at the time, I was like, yeah, I guess we can put in a breakdown. It was just like, I remember the first time like we modified one of my songs, like the drop that I had written to be in a breakdown, and I was just like, like, and the song was better for it. I mean, in hindsight, but like,
sure.
Like, God,
It's always difficult to make that
that's
first
trendy.
thing. Yeah. We'll let the kiddies have their fun.
Yeah, and it was like, man, that's so arrogant. But it was just more of like, a lot of my, I guess I grew to take pride in the music that and a certain sense of self-identity in the music that I listened to.
And that makes sense too, because in many ways, like especially when it comes to personal listening, we start to project things that we value. We start to really discover, we don't necessarily value this music because of what it's worth musically, but we value it because what it means to us and what it helps us discover about ourselves. And especially when it comes to writing your own music, and like you create it in a very specific image. It's almost like playing God, and you get to create human in the image of God, which is this sense of self that you've developed through all of your listening and what you've come to appreciate and value. And when somebody says, yeah, but it would be much better if we did this, which everybody likes, it's like, yeah, you don't get it. Like I made this because I'm not like the rest of them. I'm the chosen one. Like I created this for me, and it's like, okay, maybe you did, but if you want to perform it for other people, then there's an entirely different set of expectations and all kinds of complications that you start to encounter. And I think that's always difficult. Like the first song you write and the first time you change your song, because at the time it feels like you're doing so to satisfy somebody else's agenda. I think that's always a difficult hurdle to overcome because it feels like you're defying a piece of your very honest personality.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds like it's like you start saying this like catchy phrase because everybody else is saying it. You know, you're like, I guess I'll modify my dialogue and sense of communication for you guys because you'll like me more. You know?
That's,
and that
that's so
pretty
lit.
petty. But at the same time, like it's really arrogant to say that exact sentence in a different way. It's also really arrogant to not do that. You're like, I think the way that I communicate is inherently superior, and I'm going to ignore the fact that I just organically and happen to show up where I am today, and that's what is the right way to communicate. And you guys should. If you don't get it, that's your problem. No, like, that is incredibly arrogant. So,
and you know, even if it is superior, like even if the words are nicer, even if the structures are more fluid or eloquent, at the end of the day, it comes down to who is it that you're trying to communicate with and why. And if, you know, really just being comprehended by the people that you're engaged with is of the essence, then the reference I always make is Giovanni Boccaccio, who wrote Decameron, which was one of the first pieces of literature written in the Italian vernacular instead of Latin. And that was important because although it discussed some very actually complicated and deep and impactful political ideas, it did so in a language that people could understand. That's what I think the real genius of the Beatles was, of writing actually very complicated songs that, you know, were kind of condensed into these like trendy love songs, or in fact even the Beach Boys, their kind of American counterpart. And that's something that it was a much more mature arrival, of course, realizing why they were just better than other things that I was listening to. But it's because they took these eloquent ideas and they took these really sophisticated thoughts and you know, if you had to hierarchize it, perhaps you would say it is indeed superior to other content that's available. But they made it unpretentious, really. And I guess that kind of brings us back to where we are in our discussion today of, you know, getting away from the what's the difference between class and pretension, and then once you kind of have that awareness, it's like how do you get back to just enjoying music, you know?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, it's part of it was like I grew up listening to a lot of like heavier music because like I was a small, like, not masculine person, and I'm like I wanted to be. That's what everybody else around me was, or in my head. Like my dad was like a man, you know, and he didn't push any of this on me. It was just as a kid, you want to be what your dad is, you know. He's like, God, Dad, you're like muscular and you got a beard, and like I weigh 90 pounds, you know, like I'm trying real hard.
By the way, there's a certain subset of any of our watchers who I strongly encourage you to take a look at Cam on stage sometime. You can, that is definitely something that has changed about him. But
a lot of work on that one, forcing that one into existence. But like metal gave me that like wow. And it gave me power, and it wasn't real. It was just in my head. Like, it was way more in my head than it was in real life. But there was a little bit of like, I would play it, and people would be like, "Oh," like normal people would be like, I had control over them, and so all of a sudden they'd be like, "Oh, I don't like that. Why is he screaming?" I was like, yeah, you don't get it, do you? And it gave me a sense of like, finally, I have something that I just have a control. And then a lot of other guys that like went to metal for the same reason, like it's still like, hey, so you go to a metal show. Aside from I mean, there's like 2 girls there and that aren't girlfriends, and like you go, right. Like, I'm like, they're all like kind of all kind of awkward, and like, I'm like, what's up, man? They're like, hey, what's up? And then, like, oh, you're a weirdo too. It's like, oh yeah, what's up? You know, like there's like a little bit of kinship there because it's still like, I mean, it's gotten way more popular depending on your whatever your subgenre of it, but like, I found like a sense of private power, and that made, I'm like, so it gave me power, so it's better music. Which, I mean, I get why I came to that conclusion, and I had to find a way to convince myself that my choices were justified. And you tell yourself a lot. I mean, when you're young, you tell yourself a lot of lies to keep yourself alive. And then recently, and I kind of never really examined those until like the last few years. Like my current band, Smoke From All the Friction, is basically the first song I wrote for it was, I've said countless times like, oh, pop music's just 4 chords, like. And then my brain was like, oh, if it's so easy, we'll write a good pop song. I was like, okay. And I tried. And it's actually a decent pop song. For like, I wrote Crush and Tattoo because of that.
Oh,
And,
is that? I didn't know that. Yeah, that is a great song,
I mean,
and it's a good pop song. It's a perfectly decent pop song, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like I could write it way better now, but like at the time I was like, oh, and then I wrote it and I just kind of released one song, as opposed to like previous bands. Like I've gone through albums and nobody blinks. At least this one
Yeah.
song, and I got a couple like people like, oh, I like this. I like the drums on this. I was like,
hmm
you probably don't get anything that's going on, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to write a song that is mostly genuine.
You know, actually, you just said something interesting. I'm sorry. I'm going to deviate a bit from
Sure.
the topic here, but you know, you said, oh, you know, I could probably write it better, you know, now. I've always wondered, like, you know, a lot of musicians have really different opinions and like kind of looking retrospectively at their work. And it's like some people like to go back and like say, oh, I should have done better, and other people kind of just leave it for what it is, you know, kind of as an indicator of where you were at the time. Do you think you could write it better now, or do you think it was an important kind of honest expression of like this is my first pop song at the time?
I won't. I mean, I don't change it. I still mostly play it the same way live. I mean,
Because I have a really bad habit of there in fact one song in particular, it was off my first EP called Never Said, and I wrote it at the time when, you know, that really kind of Melbourne bounce, like really strong EDM kind of flavors. And like, you know, even just a year later, that was totally out of trend. I was like, oh my God, I can't play this out now. Oh, I've got to make it better. And I changed it around, and my mom, who actually is a very critical listener, not critical as in, you know, judgmental, but she listens very closely. Is one of my most trusted set of ears actually on my own work. And she said, I don't like how you changed it. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? It's so much cooler now. Oh, it's much more mature. And she's like, it's missing what made it really important in the first place. And I was like, yeah, what are you talking about? And I went back and listened. And I'm like, yeah, actually, she's right. So, you know, and of course, it took so many more iterations to retain that original spirit. But again, I guess not to be so arrogant to think that I knew better than what people who had heard the song and come to appreciate it for its really tangible benefits. And just because I saw something stylistically that I didn't agree with anymore, I decided, oh, I know better. I know how to make it better now.
yeah. I
And
mean,
I think
that's always
actually,
a weird place. And because I think there's also, I mean, this is a different reason, I think, a little bit, but like there's songs that you write that at the time were a very honest expression, and then now they're not. They're a dishonest expression. And
hmm,
so to me, like, I'm not a good enough performer that I can fake it. Like, I'm just not. Like, that song will be, I mean, I'll get through it. It'll be fine. It'll be like another set song that nobody notices.
hmm.
Like,
You know, for me, and I might eat these words later, but one performer who I really think I can detect that in is Billy Joel, who has written you know, very important material for, you know, in his genre and even beyond. But when I see him perform, you can kind of tell Billy Joel is tired of Billy Joel too. And I've always wondered, you know, there are some artists whose music seems to be really timeless, and they perform it as though it's their first time on stage every time they play it. And we're kind of getting into really different material for content here. We can discuss this some other time, but I've always kind of wondered about that too. I do think, kind of looking retrospectively at what was an honest expression at one time and what might feel disingenuous now, has some pretty important implications for the way we listen as well, too. You know, the way we listen to something and how we appreciated it or came to it or even used it practically at one point, and how that shifts over time as we become more exposed to more material or perhaps more educated musically.
yeah. I mean, I think like, this can tie it back into our original conversation is that a lot of, I call them frames. So in the sense that like you have a painting and then you have
Mm,
the frame, and a frame can give a lot of context and can really change how you view a painting. And a frame can also be like the wall that it's in, the gallery that it's in, or
mm,
the house that it's in, or
certainly.
what painting it's nearby. Like everything that we listen to, and every time we perform, every time anybody listens to our music or any music, they bring and project their own context on it. So like,
Mm,
I mean, I was telling you the other day, like, I think it was you, like, if I go to this part in my song and I play a guitar solo, everybody goes, cool. But if I switch that out and let Disqo play a sax solo, and even if it's three notes, it's like everybody's like, whoa, because like
mm,
the frame that they were expecting, like the context that they are like, oh, guitar solos are pretty safe, normal, I know how to do them, but this is not interesting to me. This is not novel. And to your point of always trying to have a as much as possible a novel frame to for your audience, like I think there's a use in that. And I mean, I can't speak for this particular song that you were talking about, but like, I think it is worth consideration, if nothing else. Like, is there a way to update? I'll give an example. So, like scripture, like the Christian Bible was not written in English, to say the least. Yeah, I mean, it was written in Aramaic and all these other places. And at the time, like, these were effectively dead languages that these borderline dead languages that were written in the early 1700s or something. And the council, like these councils, were picking what the Bible is, and then like they basically said you can't translate it to English because it will ruin it. It'll taint it. It'll break it. And what they did is that meant that the normal person couldn't read it, like so that the average Christian just had to blindly believe, and they didn't even have access to research this stuff on their own. So their access to these things were super like restricted. And so some guys went around and basically committed a bunch of heresy and translated it into English. You know, and is there some problems that are caused by that? Absolutely. Is there some things that did not carry over? Absolutely. And that things that are just straight wrong in translation? Definitely. But there's I would say that's far less. And they were able to bring this message to a huge group of people.
And indeed, the net benefit it provides, updated the frame.
They updated it, they were understood their audience, and they changed their song, their message, their tune to be accessible to the people around them. They weren't lost in like, this is how you're supposed to read the Bible. I mean, obviously, there's like, this is the only way to listen to it. Vinyl's the only way to do it. You can't listen to this on an MP3, or that's the remastered version or something. Of like there's all these parallels on how we want to see it. I mean, obviously, it's honest in part because you value this thing so highly. It's sacred. I mean, obviously, in religion, it's quite obviously sacred. But in a lot of our arts tastes, because they're an expression of us, are pretty damn sacred.
Definitely. Oh, yeah. And actually, a great example of that in the context of just, popular culture is, oh, God, I'm forgetting exactly what movie this was, but literally talking about the frame. A trick a lot of directors use is changing the aspect ratio of the film you're watching. Whether it's going to be full Academy gate, your 239, or like, just standard widescreen, or maybe they're going to compress it to the 4:3 to give it kind of that old school feel. Oh, I think it was The Life of Pi. And I was watching it, and like, you had your typical like aspect ratio. Aspect ratio just is, the width versus length of the screen. And it kind of shapes the way you look at a movie in a very subtle way. If you see a certain aspect ratio, you'll think, yeah, this is really a cinematic film. Or if you see another one, it's like, oh yeah, this really has that kind of home movie feel. But what happened in this one scene, they're in I think it was The Life of Pi. But they were in a boat, right? There was a scene on the water, and there were all these fish swimming around, and you just, you had your screen, and then all of a sudden, the fish jumped out of the water and outside the actual frame, and you see it in front of the black bars. And I was like, that completely changed my mind about cinematography. And I was like, wow, like, that's really important to me, because that's how I need to listen to music. That's how I need to make music, in fact. Like, if I can reframe, if there's something that needs to be reframed to be relevant, to be new, to be exciting, or, in my own music, that's the way I need to edit it. And similarly, now that I listen to music with different ears, now that I make my own music, and that music means something completely different to me than it did 20 years ago, that's the way I need to listen to. And
so would you say that a lot of musical pretentiousness is an unwillingness to recognize other frames, even if you don't have them?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the leading cause of pretension in music. I know for a long time I completely dismissed the notion of pop music, which, I was like, oh, I listen to Beethoven, I listen to the Beatles. I wish, and people were like, oh no, you gotta listen to Britney Spears. Oh, she's the shit. I'm like, oh, that's a little bit rich for my for my sophisticated blood. I
remember when I listened to Candy music. I eat real music. I'm like,
It's just like, please, feed me something more sophisticated than that. This would never pass the white glove test. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's terrible. And I think I really I left a very big void in my early experience of music, just simply because of my unwillingness to change the frame. In that, maybe these weren't meant to be the most sophisticated musical productions ever, but they were meant to appeal to a very specific piece of music and to draw on very particular aspects that would later become very important to me. Because I discounted pop, and because I never really invested too much time in listening to groups like the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC, I also missed out on Boys to Men. I also missed out on a lot of really important hip hop artists like Ice Cube, like Dr. Dre, like Tupac, even, who I didn't really rediscover until much, much later, until Tupac was dead, in fact. Or is he? And then, and I think all of that was almost entirely because I refused to change the frame through which I was looking at, my music. I refused to leave that gallery and, go down the street to the African American Museum or the museum or the Air and Space Museum or anything.
So, okay, on that, is there music that's worth rejecting the frame of? So, like, you've assessed it, you understand that you don't have this frame, but you understand fairly accurately this is what the frame is, and you're like, I still think this is a bad frame.
Oh yeah, I mean, I still think that about Taylor Swift. I think I still think that about Ed Sheeran. I still think that about a lot of groups. Not because their content is bad, not because their frame is necessarily like shouldn't exist, or like I'm somehow in the position to say this is wrong. It's something that I've taken the time to investigate, to listen to try as best as I can to understand what frame this is meant to be viewed from, and to realize that for the things, as it serves a practical purpose to me, is it useful to me? Well, I extract what I can find useful from it and, try to get as close to that as I can. Do I then aesthetically enjoy it? Do I gain pleasure from listening to it? And if the answer is no, then I probably won't be choosing to listen to that, just for my own personal listening. I would say the biggest way I've kind of gotten myself away from, or I guess learning how to enjoy music. I'm not entirely sure I've gotten away from the pretentiousness bit of it, but I do try. And the way I've gotten back to enjoying music is trying to understand. I'll just keep going with this analogy of the frame through which it's meant to be viewed, or the benefit that assessing it through that frame can offer me. I don't necessarily enjoy everything I listen to, but I can usually extract something useful from almost anything I hear. And kind of taking that as my measure of value has really changed my perception of how I listen to music.
So it's a pragmatic assessment, like a personally pragmatic assessment.
I think so. Especially, with music as my career, I think everything I listen to has some effect on ultimately what I'll produce, whether I intend for it to or not. Like, if I hear SoundCloud rap, or like, any of this really kind of hastily produced, hastily released, hastily considered, consumed and discarded music that's very prevalent these days, my first reaction is like, oh, whatever, yeah, I don't give a shit about that. Like, whatever, it's going to be gone in 5 years. I'm like, wait, but that was a very vitriolic response to something I supposedly don't care about. And that makes me think too.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's to me, like, I guess there's the corporate aspect of music. Like, again, I'm pretty pro-capitalist because I think it fixes way more things than it breaks. But like, capitalism is really good at figuring out engineering frames. They're like, oh, you want this kind of frame? Well, we'll make it look like that,
Indeed.
And I think humans do the same thing. We're just capitalist. Like, corporations are better at it.
Mm.
Like, we talked to you about the concept of authenticity, or like online authenticity. Like if we see somebody like just some kid, and he's like just like working his ass off trying to make his career, and he's like a genuine person, and like he's humble and really cares about what he's doing, and like people like are more apt to listen to his music if they know that. And so
there's definitely a question of ethos that comes into play with that.
Yeah, and so Ed Sheeran is sold as that. Is he that? Doesn't matter. He's sold as that.
Because that's the product he's sold us, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, and to his credit, I think for a long time he was that. But like, it doesn't matter. Like in popular culture, it just matters what it feels like it is. And to you and me, like, we have to investigate and have to see and have to have our hopes ruined when we find out they're just a corporate shill, you know, like, like it's always like a disappointing thing. And on the flip side, it's also like a beautiful thing when you find out like, oh, wow, you're like, they're pure of heart of sorts, you know, like.
Indeed. But that's always like a second level assessment, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it is like, I've had a couple of bands where like I heard like their music was way more shallow than I thought it was. It's like, wow, this is really fantastic. Like, I thought it was this frame, and then I hear an interview about them, and I was like, oh, wow, this is actually a really crappy frame. I just didn't know it, you know? I've had music ruined.
Sure. And I think that happens. Even the Beatles, who I give a lot of credit, and I will stand by them as the best band and most important band.
But you watch an interview with those kids, like,
oh yeah, they're such assholes, and you can tell, like, you know, they're like talking about how like capitalist and like corporate sellouts they all are, and they, you know, are they putting it on? Who knows? Like they had this image of the kind of like, you know, the roguish scoundrel, and you know then John Lennon started taking himself very seriously. But you know, again, it's like you kind of have to weigh like what people say about their own work, and is what they say in the public eye about something they've created that you've consumed privately really the best indicator of the way they actually feel about their own work or the situation in which it was created. That's a much broader question. But I can really see what you mean about, like, you know, hearing an interview about a particular thing that I never really gave too much credit to. I'm like, oh wow, you know, there was a lot invested in this, and you know, maybe I just wasn't thinking about it in the right perspective to begin with, or you know, just the opposite. Definitely worth thinking about.
So I got this has been my go-to example lately is the Fallout games. Like Fallout 76 is, I think, is obviously the epitome of corporatizing this, you know, previously passion project. Like the first two games and the games before Fallout that inspired it were like, at the time, computer games were not hugely profitable by today's terms, and there's so much detail put in those first two DOS games that like is never going to be seen by most anybody who plays it. Like 5% of people. And most of the developers who built this were super into it, and they were super excited about it. And so they dedicated their lives to build this thing, which makes that game better for me. I mean, it's rough. There's a lot of problems with it, and it's like hard to use and it's hard. But like knowing that this is like a purer, I mean, again, it's assigning value, but a purer thing.
Sure.
Like, I don't fault anyone for pursuing money. I have no problem with that. Doesn't break your product at all. But it also, like, where on the totem pole is the money? You know,
it introduces some additional complications that people deal with varying levels of success.
And to me, like, I mean, this is obviously like you assign your own views on this thing, but like 30 Seconds to Mars, like I thought, like Jared Leto is a great singer. Like the first album was kind of unknown, and they kept doing it. Like it seemed to be he just wanted to do this, have like a rock band and do like pseudo electronic-y rock stuff. And I'm like, okay, the second album he had they achieved a Billboard hit, cool. Like, and it wasn't a like the Kill. That was not a normal song. Like
indeed.
For the Billboard, I mean, it's not super weird or anything, but for the Billboard, it's pretty odd and like awesome. But I feel like almost in their last release, I just felt like I was pandered to. I feel like a bunch of record execs got in a room. They're like, all right, what made Jared Leto sell records? All right, do that. You know, and maybe that's not what happened. Like maybe they're just trying to evolve with the times, and maybe they're trying to find that language and trying to find the frame to honestly exert themselves. But it seemed to me that they were more focused on the frame than the painting. Again, that's a completely ignorant, just personal, like.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear what he has to say about that.
Yeah, and again, I don't. Is that pretentious? Probably a little bit, you know? I mean, I'm assigning my own. At the end of the day, I was like, wow, this feels like cheap and easy. Like they're trying to make it that way, you know? Like shave off all the edges.
Yeah, but you know, then again, there's music that's obviously built for instant consumption, and then you know, and to that end, that's the way I've started considering like music that wouldn't necessarily be my first aesthetic choice, but you know, things that I don't find unpleasant to listen to. You know, I wouldn't actively seek it out, but I will listen to top 40 radio just to hear what's going on and kind of consider it from the perspective of, you know, this is supposed to be kind of fun and easy to sing along with, and you remember the tunes, and you can just vibe with it. And you know, the role of music has become pretty different in our society than I think, at least up until now, than it has been in the past. And that's also influenced the way that it's produced, the way that it's listened to, certainly, and also the way that musicians listen to music.
How like what are the bigger trends that you're alluding to?
Well, active listening is almost non-existent in our society right now. Even when people attend live shows, which is increasingly less frequently, at least in my experience, mainly because the acts you want to see cost so damn much, because they have to charge that much because they can't make any money selling records. Different discussion. But, you know, we have, I call it hyphenated music. You know, we have our driving music, we have our, you know, working music, we have our studying music, we have our cooking music, we have our, you know, we have our love-making music, everything. And when's the last time you sat down in front of the stereo and just put on a record and was like, I'm going to listen to this record now because I want to listen to it?
It's been years.
Right. And that, I think,
I'm gonna focus my attention on this. I'm gonna meditate on this music.
Exactly. And I think that really, really shapes the way that people produce music and how the most successful music is produced, because people go into it with this awareness of the way that it's going to be used. And the music on today's top 40 charts belongs perfectly in Spotify playlists. I also think Spotify playlists and Spotify in general is the biggest corporate evil and needs to be stopped, and I reject everything about it. I just wanted to go on record and say that. But
and your album's on Spotify.
My album is definitely on Spotify. I'm not going to say anything else about its position on Spotify because that might start to incriminate me. But my album is on Spotify because it has to be, because in order to lend yourself credence as an artist, sometimes you just got to feed the machine. And the machine is alive and well in music listening culture. But back to my earlier point of, you know, music listening culture and the way that influences the way music is created, I think almost everybody who's performing at a very high level in today's musical economy is starkly aware of the way that their product is being consumed. And that certainly shapes, you know, the way that it's produced, the way that it's meant, the frame that it's meant to be put in, essentially. You know, they know it's going to be in a huge warehouse gallery that's free to enter, that every frame kind of looks the same, and, you know, you got to put in a picture that's going to fit these exact dimensions.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like culture as a whole has adopted. I mean, because these frames apply to everything that we consume, from news to friends to like. I mean, the reality is like our ideas on culture, like a lot of them are handed to us because we got to get them from somewhere. You know, we got to have context. Like going in blind is worse than having a frame handed to you.
Mm.
So I guess is there? Here's a pretentious question: is there music that's bad?
No, that's a good question.
We'll go, and by bad I mean more bad than good. Obviously, it's not pure evil. Like,
I've heard music that I thought was kind of pure evil before. And then I listened to it again and I actually really liked it.
Sure.
I'm referring to Kaoru Abe. He's a Japanese saxophonist. The first time I heard it, I was like, "Wow, what the fuck is this?" And am I allowed to say that on a podcast? I think I am, right?
We'll get demonetized by our Lizard King.
I should be careful. I know we have like an all ages program here, so I apologize for that. But yeah, and then I listened to it again, and so there's music that I think I don't understand, and therefore believe it to be bad at first. We as humans tend to generally, and this is something I first heard from my girlfriend, and really didn't want to believe at first, and then realized she was really right, and then felt terrible. But she said, you know, Matthew, you have a great tendency to destroy the things that frighten you. I was like, "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous! I'm gonna smash this spider, and I don't care." And then I was like, "Oh man, yeah." Um, and I started thinking about how that pertains to the things I listen to, and I really began to question, you know, have I disliked things in the past because I don't understand it, because its implications versus the music I make frighten me? And in many of those cases, the answer were yes. And there were still a few cases where I thought, you know, I really don't see the benefit of this music, not just to myself, but I don't see the benefit of the frame that it exists in. I don't understand how anybody could extract something positive from this. Um, and like to give an example of that, uh, you listen to music that deals with things that I consider morally incorrect, like, you know, anti-Semitic music, for instance, or, you know, a lot of it comes down to me to what I consider like morally wrong. A lot of it deals with racism. A lot of it deals with kind of what I consider to be misguided beliefs on, you know, sex or religion or anything like that. And when your product is soliciting that kind of prejudice, not just necessarily exposing it, and perhaps in doing so, allowing you to enter a deeper discussion of why people hold these opposing values, but when it's really just kind of proselytizing to a destructive ideology, I find it difficult to consider that like good or useful.
Hmm.
And I know that gets into the very difficult question of maintaining an objective truth. And who's to say that my idea of right and wrong is truly right and wrong? I don't know that. But I do believe there is good, and I do believe there's evil. And um, music, and in general art, that I believe serves a solely evil purpose, I tend to have a hard time finding the constructive benefit. Like, for example, when somebody draws a swastika on a synagogue, I don't consider that artistic, nor do I consider it free speech. I consider that destructive, and I don't consider that good, or a contribution that can be regarded as, you know, just constructive in any way.
In any way, yeah.
And I think I would probably assess music the same way, in that within the realm of creative products, and this covers everything. You know, like I find some music easier to listen to than others. There's kind of a line beyond which it becomes bad music to me, and that's when you can literally, in no reasonable consideration of what frame you're looking at it through, or who you are looking at it through what frame, it just, if you can't extract anything positive from it, then to me it becomes bad music.
Hmm. Okay.
Is that enough? I know. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
I kind of went on there for a bit.
I'm not stuck on it. I was just like I'm pondering that.
Well, yeah. So, like, for example, I would never call like I don't like Drake as a person. I don't like some of the things he's said, especially as it relates to Kid Cudi's health. And I, as a, as an individual, maybe I find him distasteful. I will never say his music is bad, though. In fact, many people think his music is really good. They love listening to his music. And does it kind of fall into line with, modern production technique and standards? Yes, it does. Does it sell really, really successfully on the charts, and, on internet radio, and you know, on the airwaves? Yes, it does. Does it serve as a benchmark of what popular music is in our society right now? Yes, it does. And all of those points, I think those are exceedingly beneficial, even though I don't find it aesthetically pleasing all of the time. And in that light, of course, I can never call it bad music. Same thing goes for Ed Sheeran, same thing goes for Taylor Swift, same thing goes for a lot of artists who I wouldn't actively choose to listen to, but still find incredibly important and incredibly beneficial in my holistic experience of listening to music.
So on this note, like, how far? I mean, I, as an artist, meaning that you express things via art. I'm using extremely vague terms here. You know, like, how far would you be willing to sacrifice your current modes of expression and your current modes of canvas design? So I guess I'm saying, like, if to better convey your ideas, the market moved in a way that music was not that anymore.
Oh,
Like,
I'd do it in a heartbeat. Yeah, for me, music, and I know this is a highly personal question that every artist has to answer. Music is my main interface with the world. Really, what I desire more than anything else is communication. Because I think there are a lot of things that I would like to share and a lot of things that I would like other people to share with me. And thus far, music is the most effective way I've found to interface with the society that I want to do that with. If it became apparent that there was a better way to do that, that I found as much honesty available to me and I found as much ability to create the means by which to do that, I think I certainly would. I think the more probably realistic way of looking at it is like, you know, if musical taste shifts in a way that takes me way outside my genre, um, yeah, you know, I think being relevant and being consumable, retaining the vernacular by which the people you care about speaking to are going to continue to understand you in is important.
mm, so it's hinged upon your audience, whoever that is or isn't.
Indeed, and there's a very strong distinction in my mind between pandering to your audience and continuing to desire to communicate with them. Because you know you can never really, in good faith, I think, pander to an audience. Otherwise, you end up with what you know the same sort of feeling that you feel about the last 30 Seconds to Mars release. It's like, oh, yeah, it's cheap and cheerful, and I'm not really getting anything honest out of it. And then you know if conversely they came out with something that was like totally left-handed and just was like nothing like anything they did before, and you know you have the opportunity there to sort of lose people who were willing to entertain this conversation with you, and because you decided to start speaking a different language, or indeed you forgot the language that this was occurring in the first place, and don't really update your lingo to you know stay hip or whatever, that kind of creates an equally distancing effect, I think.
So I give a common pretentious example. This happens less now because I don't work with as many musicians. But like every time I've tried to start a band, there's inevitably a set of arguments that take place over, well, what kind of band we're going to be. And then you're like, oh, I want this, and like, oh, we're not doing that. And there's this like pretentious conversation of like, you kind of have to collectively like reject some of these certain things that you want this band to be for the whole. And like, so I guess, for instance, like heavy music's really bad about this because it's got to be brutal because we're all super insecure white kids. Like they can't release their own frame of expression through heavy music because like in some ways it's the only frame they know. And it's the frame. It's this why they got into music was to feel the power and aggression and scream on stage, and it feels awesome. You know, like you're like, dude, singing ballads with a Moog behind me in an 808 doesn't do that for me. You know, so like, I mean, I think there's part pretentious in that. I think pretentiousness is not recognizing and being honest about why you're trying to do it. But I don't think it's inherently pretentious or problematic.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's just kind of staying up to date, right? Or at least keeping yourself honest.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's so often I see that stuff in hindsight, but like that's the thing with pretentious is you don't see it in the moment, you know? It's like, what are we doing now that we're gonna look back? We're like, God, we're so flipping arrogant. Like,
Mm. But then, yeah, I mean, I would probably separate like arrogant and pretentious. I think arrogance is when you don't really understand the full scope of what you're doing and decide to do it anyway because you think you know. And pretentious is like sort of when you do understand and know you might be wrong and still decide to do it anyway.
so I guess that like how from a practical standpoint, what are behaviors that we either are doing and most likely need to start implementing that will allow us that will continuously grant us like continued knowledge of our own either arrogance or pretentiousness, like
Mhm.
that'll root those behaviors out.
Well, for me, honestly, it's drawing a hard line of what I am and am not willing to entertain. And really, what I found in doing that is there's very little I'm not at least willing to entertain a little bit. And that just opens the door to so much that of not immediately discounting something because it makes you uncomfortable or because you think it's beneath you or because you think it's not relevant to you. And chances are it probably is, and there's something you can get out of it and something you can enjoy about it.
I was thinking about this the other day, and maybe I'm not sure if you're the same bucket, but like I pride myself, and this is just more. It's been this way. I mean, partly from my own effort, partly not. Is that in my group of friends that like I think I'm more into this than all of them. Like at least
Mm.
like my little corner of everything, and I think I'm better at it. I mean, like if we had a
Mm.
competition, we'd be better at it. I was like, damn, that sounds really arrogant, Cam. And I was like, it's probably just because you're not hanging around with people who are better than you. But like, what happens when I'm not prepared for that next kid who's 10 years younger than me and better than me, and on a roll and it's got all these things like I started thinking about that guy, you know,
Mm.
some 18-year-old or whatever. That's like that's really been motivating me. First of all, maybe just my
Mm.
pretentiousness is an insecurity is motivating me to do some stuff because of this theoretical
Yeah,
person that I know is there.
I think though allowing that to inspire you is the most unpretentious thing you can do because it's kind of like this admission of guilt of like, yeah, I've been getting awfully comfortable thinking I know what I know, and it's like at some point or another you have to ask yourself, who do you think you are, right?
I mean, that relates back to like what we were saying about the self-imposed limitations of
Mm.
putting yourself where you're tested. Like
Right.
you
And
realize,
I've always felt like if ever there was a day where I failed to find something that I could do better or something that I wanted to improve, my career would probably be over. Like, then the creative process would be finished and I'd have no more left to contribute.
yeah,
But yeah, that scares me too. I mean, look, I've got the K-pop stars up on my wall, and like every day there's like this like 17-year-old who's like killing it. I'm like, oh man, like that's new. They're
yeah,
young.
yeah. Why am I not there? You know,
Yeah.
and because like your gut instinct is like, oh, they're just selling out, or they're just pop, or they're just blah
You're
blah
right,
blah.
right.
Like,
It's just this. It's
like that
just I was
defense
like,
mechanism. You're like, no, dude, they're just living their dreams, and
they're
you're
just
not.
yeah, right. They're just killing it, and you're sitting here complaining about it online. Hmm.
Yeah, and I was like, man, I call myself a neckbeard for the first time today because I was like, wow, dude, I'm just sitting here whining on stuff and not focusing on what I can do, like not claiming this is my responsibility, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. And that's something that's really helped me too. Um, being, I guess, not enjoying music that people show me, or like they'll say, "Oh, this is great. You really got to listen to it." I go, "What are you talking about? This is terrible." Or like, just being like, "Oh, like, why am I going to waste my time with that?" All of that comes down to, uh, you know, not accepting my own responsibility. It's like, okay, you want people to listen to you, you want people to show your music to other people. Well, that's part of the job, and it's part of the job that you're not satisfying to the effect that you desire right now. So figure out what you lack or figure out your way of delivering it best, and that's a very humbling experience. And I think it becomes really difficult actually to be too pretentious after that because you start to realize it about yourself. You start to realize, well, and this is kind of what I was saying earlier. By immediately discounting these things as unimportant or insignificant, I missed out on some actually very important and influential pieces of music history during the period that we were growing up in, and had to kind of re-educate myself on that later. So
Yeah, I mean, it's just like imagine if, like, I mean, I don't know if your parents did or not. My parents don't want to talk about that, but take a person that was in the '60s, and then they're like, Jimi Hendrix is stupid. He's blah 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 blah, and versus this other person who's like, Jimi Hendrix is cool. Like, I mean, my parents think he's stupid, and maybe he is, but I'll try it and check out. Let's go to Woodstock. You know, which of those people would you rather have been? You know,
right, exactly.
And I mean, obviously there's a huge middle ground, and I think there's better way to do the second one, but like being able to, like, to me, like getting into electronic music was really difficult, and it still is difficult because I like the music, I love the energy, I hate the fans, because like I like these people that just, I mean, I think it's really impressive what they do, and they're like, oh my god, where? And then like so many of these fans, because it's become popularized, are like, where's the drop? And then I was like, and then I rewind. I was like, no, there's this beautiful thing that's happening here. And then the market gets oversaturated and tainted, and then the people that I really cared about in the genre have moved on anyway. And then it's just,
well, that's kind of symptomatic of anything that becomes like hyper popularized. Like, the CDJ is essentially the electric guitar of this generation. Every kid that wants to get into music wants Ableton and a pair of CDJs, and that's kind of the standard. So, like anything, you end up with a wildly diverse market, which all kind of condenses into one big blob, and that's sometimes hard to navigate.
yeah. I mean, to me, like my band currently is, like, it doesn't bother me. I use a lot of backing tracks, partly because I don't have people to play it, but like part of me, I was scared of it. Because I was like, oh, I reversely pretentious to myself. It's like, use backing tracks. I was like saying this to myself.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Well, because I was like, oh man, like the biggest thing for me is like, wow, you mean I can't tell these people to stop playing and they won't stop playing? I'm like, and like, yeah, I'm a control freak, as many producers are. But yeah, you're right. You kind of start to reverse pretentious yourself into this weird corner of not wanting to do the things that you need because they're popular and good and will help you. But it's like, oh, I don't want to help. I don't want the help. I don't need it. I'm better than that.
I mean, I think to me this is something I'm deathly afraid of. And I never had a super traumatic event where it happened, but like where somebody calls me on, like, hey, why'd you do that? You did it because you're a sellout. You're doing this because you previously were this, like, you followed like higher ideals or whatever, but now you're literally just doing this thing and changing this thing about your performance or about your art because it's trendy. I was like, I don't think that day will ever happen, but I'm like, God, that terrifies me. It's like, no, I am a true artist, like, it's
of
pure,
course. And I think the proof of that is that you continue to find ways to express. Like, look at David Bowie. David Bowie is my favorite musician, and I have no qualms in saying that. But he was a man who was so attuned to what was capable of being popular, of what could sell. The whole Starman thing. With like Space Oddity, that was all kind of like a tie-in with the moon landings, and he was just like desperate for a hit at that point, and it became a seminal piece of that era of music. So I think you can be disingenuous with the content, or you can be very honest with what it is you want to express and just find the right language to speak it in.
Yeah, I guess that criticism terrifies me, but
Well, me too. But I think that criticizes everybody who thinks they have something honest to say.
I mean, because like in some ways, most of the artists that I really like are serious. They're serious artists. They're not silly, And even the sillier ones or like poppier ones that I like, I'm like, yeah, I like Linkin Park. Yeah, like I'm embarrassed of it because they're not serious enough. Like Tool's a very serious band, even though
they certainly are.
Like, even when they like make jokes, they're like this like 14 layers of sarcasm wrapped in like some social critique somewhere. Like
right. Yeah.
And Trent Reznor, very like dark, serious music. Like every time he's in an interview, he's just like this, like what I see like as Van Gogh style, like just.
Oh yeah, well like that like the angry emoji where their eyebrows are like that the whole time. Yeah. Like that's very much Trent Reznor.
Yeah, but like some guys like Devin Townsend, he's like he's goofy. Like he makes jokes all the time. I don't know if you listen to him at all, but like
Yeah, I'm familiar with him. I don't listen to him terribly.
He's hilarious. He's a goofball, but like his jokes constantly, like there's so much like this like Eastern philosophy, and like he makes fun of his self-deprecation. Like it's there's so many layers of meta and like awareness that is involved in his critique. And like he wrote an entire like super technical album, like metal album, to critique super technical metal albums. The whole thing is just building up to this crescendo. The entire album is just progressively just wankier stuff. And then finally they just like crazy narrative that's happening. And then finally it turns out the entire purpose of life is this alien cheeseburger. That's how the album, like the denouement. He's like, dude, because it's all like wanky masturbatory stuff that like we are all lying to ourselves about, that it's why are you taking everything so seriously? And it's like part of it, you're just hiding behind things. And so part of me is, like has that like goofiness to me, and part of me like craves to be a serious artist. You know, I'm a real like, and I can't see myself as, I'm not sure where it is along that lines, because I'm a goofy person in the sense I love being playful and joking, and I'm also really serious in the sense that like I really care about these things, and I think they're really important, and I think they're beautiful, and I think they're blah blah blah, and like I want to see the infinite depth that I can find inside and find them inside them. And are they silly? I don't even know. But then at the same time, like I have trouble trying to find a model between or wherever that is. Like I haven't found somebody else doing that, and I feel insecure. And again, that reverse pretentiousness for not being the serious artist.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, definitely.
I write a lot of pop influenced stuff, and even now, like I like consider like ditching certain songs. Like today, I was like, I had a song. I was like talking to my girlfriend. I was like, "Hey, I think I might just not do this on album." She's like, "Well, it's pretty catchy. I mean, people seem to like it." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's super poppy."
And you know that kind of internal struggle, I think most people, most creators. I mean, who knows if Trent Reznor is like just sits in his room like, shit, man. Like I wish I could make some jokes on the stage and people would laugh. Like, damn. Like, oh man. Like I wish it could be funny. Like who knows? You know.
And maybe I mean it's just him like him just compensating for the other things that happened in his life that it got him to.
Could be.
And maybe he had no idols that would gave him permission to do that. You know.
Oh, you know, I think you just hit it on the head. I think the biggest key to musical confidence is just realizing you don't really have to ask for permission. And
you just have to learn how to execute.
Indeed. And I know this is kind of a far cry from you know, where we came from, non-pretentious listening or just enjoying music, but you know, we all enjoy certain things more than others. Like our ears just appreciate different sounds more than others, and a lot of our early musical tastes are shaped by other people basically giving you permission to like something or another. And actually getting away from that is what allows us to really enjoy music for ourselves rather than to satisfy some sort of external structure that's been kind of given to us.
Yeah, I mean, like the example that people use all the time is baby metal, because I think it's such an interesting thing to hear like males talk about it, particularly in the metal community, of course. Because I'm like, okay, here's the deal: you mute the vocals. It is fantastic metal. Like it's not anything majorly creative. It's super well executed, but it's good from a semi-objective.
Yeah, it's just like killing speed metal. Like
yeah, and like it's tight. It's mixed fantastically. It sounds great live. And then you have these three like the most anti like it's not even the same solar system as planet metal, like
literally the antithesis of metal, actually.
Yeah, and it's like it's a cute, adorable, like innocent, like and like a lot of guys don't, and they make a joke about it. Is usually what it does. They're like, yeah, I like bloody metal. Yeah, sounds cool. Yeah, because I'm just like, you're fighting against your own pretentiousness. Your desire to enjoy this thing is inhibited by your own perceptions of what you should desire. Myself
that's
included.
A good point. Yeah.
You know, could I get into K-pop or J-pop or these super? We'll go with like actually a lot of modern pop is like pretty artificially dark at this point. So in the Western world, so it's a little easier now. Like you listen to like Selena Gomez. Like I wrote this like dark part. It was it was like, you know, like a major third, minor third, flat 2, 1. It was just like this evil thing, and I was like playing it with like this cool synthesizer, with like this club beat. And I showed it to Victoria. I was like, dude, this is like really dark. She's like, it just sounds like a trap song intro. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess everything's kind of like a fakely dark now.
We have, we have the weekend to thank for that, really.
Yeah, and it kind of bothers. I mean, in some ways, I like it because my ear just it's empowering. Because like goes back to those metal days. I was like, his music look like a little cold, you know? Like,
although I gotta say, I took a closer listen to "I Can't Feel My Face When I'm With You." I don't even know what that song is about. That was a really well produced track.
dude, that whole album is. I mean, again, I don't have to love it like musically to like, wow, it's perfect.
And I thought, I wanted a remix of that song, and then I heard somebody's remix, and I was like, it's cool. And I went back and listened to the original. I was like, yeah, this is sexy. Like, I really liked it. So
yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, I mean, but like, again, I have no problems. Like, it actually that's interesting to bring that up. Like, I have no problems liking The Weeknd, or say why, because he's dark and sexy and like those things that like
right.
I wanted to see myself as, as opposed to what's the like something that's cold, like happy. Like early Taylor Swift.
Sure, yeah.
Like, and actually that's something I've been focused on. 1989, her album is a fantastically written album. Like that is how you write a pop album. And I'm forcing myself to say like that's a really well written album.
Yeah,
I'm trying to like force myself to proselytize.
And I guess again, yeah, you can extract what you need for it. Doesn't mean you have to write music like her. You probably couldn't, and I would be a little bit offended if you did. But I don't think it's really going to sell you writing all these diss songs about your ex-boyfriends. But
yeah, that part not so much.
You never know.
Like, the overall production and the like she captures like Welcome to New York.
Yeah,
like,
and
like,
she.
I feel exactly what she wants me to feel in that song, and it annoys me at first. I was like, God, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing, and it's working so well.
And that's it's annoying for an artist to feel, because you kind of feel like you're immune to that, because like the tricks, like what's going on, and then it still works, and you're like, wow, like that's probably important. I should figure out how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, like, and then it becomes like, I feel like that's a slippery slope. Like, of okay, I'm learning all the tricks to manipulate my audience, and I'm like, well, okay, what are you manipulating your audience to do? You're like, oh, this noble thing. I'm like, really. I mean, I think there's a word to this is a super common conversation with when it comes to pretentiousness is the selling out. Like people talk, and then there's this. I think the industry has come this the local artists have come full circle, because I hear this phrase all the time now. They're like, dude, if I had the opportunity, I would super sell out. I hear that a lot because they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, I mean.
Well, selling out as a general concept is a little bit flawed in the way people discuss it, because every artist wants to sell out. Everybody wants to play a great show to like what they consider to be a sold out audience, which means really at its essence that the community that you work within has fully invested its resources in supporting you.
I guess by sell out, I think people are referring to your original non-monetary and non-fame. That's it. Any intentions basically you had that were non-monetary and non-fame related. That if you sacrifice anything that aren't those two to get where you are, you've begun or fully sold out.
Well, damn.
Yeah, and exactly. And the reality is, I think it's super arrogant to assume that that's not somewhere in your mind. I think there's a couple artists who are like beyond that. I think they're few and far between.
Well, let me conclude then with saying this, and the reason that I find Spotify so distasteful, although I have to take part in it. I heard so let's just consider Spotify. It's a platform that basically distributes artists' music for free and pays them essentially nothing in return. And I heard an interview with the CEO of Spotify who, from his position of running a freemium service that extorts other musicians who make his product for him, that he then sells and really doesn't pay that well for, he said, if you're going into music, it can't be about the money. It's about the art, it's about the creation. It can't really be about the money. And I was just like, that doesn't sit well with me.
It's hard hearing from him. I feel like he's got a bit of a bias in that whole. Well, I agree with him to an extent.
I agree with him to the extent of like the creative instinct can never be monetized. Like you can't say I'm going to make music for the money. If you said that, you'd be stupid because there are so many easier ways to generate cash. You know, become a realtor, get anything, like anything. So it should never be the like perhaps it's not the smartest to begin a career in music simply because you think it's going to afford you monetary gain. However, you know, being a musician and being an artist in general is just as much a career as being a computer programmer or being a scientist or being a teacher. And, you know, at the end of the day, every musician has to consider, how am I going to use what I want to do um, to generate a living for myself, to continue to be able to persist to do what I want to do. And that's equally as valid a consideration in my mind as what's the most honest way to express what I have to express.
I think we should do an episode on Spotify. I got a lot of like
Yeah, maybe
I dug
maybe
into their algorithm for like decently, not deeply, but deeper than most people, and how they actually like do stuff. So
I probably haven't looked at it as deeply as you, but I've done some sort of surface level statistical analyses of how the most successful artists on Spotify have been paid for their contributions. Not a pretty picture, but more on that later.
Right on, man. Dude, it's super fun talking to you. Like,
Likewise, as always. And of course, we always hope that you, our viewers, enjoy what you're hearing and invite you to take part in the conversation.